Hey everybody, I'm John Anderson. I'm a principal consultant at Network to Code, and I'm also the product owner of a project known as Nautobot, which is what we'll be talking about today. Excited to be back at Field Day. I think this is my third time presenting with you all. Always a fun time. So I'll give a brief overview just on who Network to Code is for those that may not know a little bit about Nautobot. Nautobot is something that we've talked about at Network Field Day before. And specifically today in my presentation, I'm going to be talking about the app platform and the ecosystem that we've built around that solution set. So Network to Code, we are a professional services organization that is centered around network automation. We've been around for a number of years, 2014. As Tom mentioned, Jason Edelman, our founder, is a kind of a figurehead within the vertical space that is network automation, of course. Network to Code is a really exciting company to work for. We are small in size compared to some of the big names in the industry, but we are rapidly growing, and we have a very big focus on community. In fact, a lot of our skill set within our company comes directly from this community. You can find us on slack.networktocode.com. So what is Nautobot? That's what we'll be talking about today. It's an open source network source of truth application. And we'll talk about what that means, but it's basically the data that drives your network automation would be stored within Nautobot. But it's so much more than that. In fact, it's an app platform centered around network automation. So it's more than just the data. It's also a platform for driving network automation solutions itself. It's a fully open source project licensed under Apache 2. It is, of course, sponsored by Network to Code. And we launched Nautobot at NFD 24. So coming up on a year, Nautobot's first birthday. How would one use Nautobot? As I mentioned, it's a source of truth. But in doing so, we strive to create a flexible source of truth. So Nautobot, when you install it, does come with an opinionated data model about some core networking components. What is a network device? We've got some IPAM functionality for tracking prefixes and IP addresses, of course, and lots of things along those lines. You can track cable plant, you can do rack diagrams and so forth. But that feature set, of course, doesn't fit for every organization. And so we have to have a lot of good flexibility in allowing you to build the data model that is correct and needed for your particular organization. And that's where features like custom fields and custom user-definable relationships come from, where you can augment and extend that data model to fit your specific use cases. So if it's data that is specific to your organization or set of network designs that you have, you can model it in that way. And of course, an extensible platform for network automation. We've got a lot of features that are necessary in this day and age for making that sort of thing successful. Obviously, we have a REST API. That's a given a modern application stack. But we've also got GraphQL support. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's really, I think, the next evolution of a traditional REST-based API interface in which you can, as a client, form a query and get a response back in a format that you desire. Really makes interaction with the data in the system that much better. We've got an event-based webhook system, of course, and then some really interesting Git integrations for actually storing and managing your data outside of Nautobot and getting it in and out of the application. And then the basis for what we'll be talking about today is the extensible plugin architecture. And that plugin architecture enables what we call the network automation app platform. And that, again, that's our focus today. But what that allows us to do is build tailored solutions to specific network automation vertical integrations within the space, but also at an organizational level, you can create your own solutions on top of this open source platform. So where does Nautobot fit in the ecosystem? Where does it fit in terms of the solution set for network automation? Well, obviously, as a source of truth, it is that center for the data component. And so your users are doing a lot of interaction with Nautobot itself from a data perspective, adding devices, adding VLANs, associating, interface connections between devices and so forth. Then you've got your orchestration system. This is what actually needs to introduce the business logic for how do we perform these automations across your organization to your network and so forth. And then we've got the execution components, which actually talk to the network devices, and then the telemetry stack, which is how we get state back out of the network. And so what we form here is this feedback loop of automation, and it is centered around Nautobot and that orchestration engine. And on the outside here, we've got these green circles that represent the opportunities for the true business value in mindset in my mind. So that's where the app platform really comes into play, is enabling these sorts of solutions, whether it's golden configuration for making sure that the standard configurations that are deployed on our network are actually true and correct and validated. Change management practices for how do we actually make sure the data that is in Nautobot is correct and has gone through approval processes and so forth. Onboarding of devices to various monitoring and management systems, and on and on and on. There's all sorts of point solutions that are necessary to build a holistic platform. And that's where Nautobot as an application platform really shines. So obviously, one size doesn't fit all, and organizations need to come up with a solution that works for them. And that's where the flexibility in this platform comes from. So if we want to build our own automation platform, we'll start from the Nautobot base. And as I mentioned, when you install Nautobot, you're going to get an opinionated data model about networking that represents the core. What is realistic for all organizations? What are things that they care about? Tracking locations and sites, and again, that inventory of devices, maybe tracking circuits and things like that. But on top of that, that's our core, that's our shell. On top of that, we'll build a platform that's specific for us. So maybe in my organization, I care about device lifecycle management. So tracking contracts and support notices from my vendors and making sure that I have validated and approved software versions running on my devices. That's device lifecycle management, is an app that's open source on top of the Nautobot app platform. Perhaps another one, again, golden configuration that I mentioned, validating configurations that I built are standardized to my organizational business rules and that they are correct. Single source of truth is going to be another big focus for later presentations today, but this is around data is diverse in an organization and not one system typically holds all of it, right? It's a bit of a pipe dream. So the single source of truth approach allows us to embrace that fact, but allow us to aggregate data in ways that are meaningful from a network automation standpoint. So we have integrations with various solutions that are out there, custom or vendor provided, so we can get data to and from these systems in Nautobot and ultimately enable that data to be used within the broader app platform that we're building. Another one that we'll talk about today, circuit maintenance. This is a really exciting one that's pretty recent for us. This is around intake of notifications from vendors, from our service providers around circuit maintenance notices, and actually doing impact analysis against the circuits that we've got tracked within Nautobot, so we can see what is the relationship of the impact of a particular provider maintenance and so forth. So
before you run on there, I want to hear a bit more about that. That sounds interesting. So we're going to hear that later. Okay, yes. Awesome. Thanks.
Absolutely. So again, Nautobot is a platform that we're trying to build. So when you install Nautobot out of the box, you get some base functionality, but the real business value comes from this app ecosystem that we're building around here. So in true networking fashion, we've got some acronym soup on the board here, of course, but some of these we will run through specifically later on in presentations, but I'll call out a few, like device lifecycle management. We've got some work coming on BGP modeling, data modeling for that, capacity planning, and then some specific integrations, with like Cisco ACI or Arista Cloud Vision through our single source of truth apps and so forth, version controlling for integration with the adult database backend and so forth. So just a tremendous ecosystem that we've built around there, and I've got some more specific examples of that later in the presentation as well. So how do we accomplish this? This is more of maybe a more in-depth technical look at what the architecture actually looks like. So when you install the core of Nautobot, Nautobot is a Django-based application, and it supports 3 different database backends today. Postgres and MySQL are probably the 2 most primary that people may be familiar with, but a third option is actually one called Dolt. And this is specific to a particular app that we built on the platform for version control. And Dolt is a really interesting exploration in the combination of traditional relational databases and Git constructs. So what it allows us to do is Git-based workflows for data management within the application itself. So today in network automation, many of you may be familiar with what we might do with like our Ansible playbooks, where we've got data that we would version control and put through peer review process in a Git repository, right? We can take those exact same concepts with Dolt and the application on top of Nautobot here to do that same sort of thing within the Nautobot application itself with the nice web UI and so forth. So we open a pull request, we make some changes, we go through peer review, and eventually merge that in those data changes. That's just one particular database backend that I'd like to call out there. So on top of core, we installed these applications, and these are in fact just Nautobot apps are just an abstraction on regular Django applications, but there's a specific app framework set of libraries that core extends that you as an application developer would make use of. So in terms of skill set in the network automation landscape, to develop a Nautobot app would require a bit more of a software engineering skill set than maybe traditional network engineering transitioning into the automation realm, of course. So I will call that out, but we've really tried to make that application framework really extensible and really easy to use so that people that are interested in making that transition and going even further with their skill set development can certainly make use of that. And of course, the ecosystem that we're talking about today, while organizations are today and will continue to make custom applications developed inside their organizations, there's a large ecosystem that Network to Code is sponsoring in the open source space where you can just off the shelf install these, no code required on your behalf. So an application ties in with that framework again to some specific hooks within the core. So what apps are able to provide are their own new data models. So I mentioned core comes with an opinionated view of this, but an app can provide their own data models for different purposes. As I mentioned, we're working on some BGP modeling. So that's an application that's providing the models necessary to describe BGP configuration within Nautobot. Obviously, an app is going to implement its own business logic and so forth in the form of web API views or REST API integrations and GraphQL, and then they have access to the extensibility features. So if an application is providing a new data model, but they need to interact with some of the core data models, a good example is I've got my BGP configuration. I need to link that to the devices that are running BGP, right? The extensibility feature set allows them to do that. They can create those relationships to other data models that exist within the ecosystem. And then take it one level further, there's tons of different things that applications can do. Just I call out a few here. Jobs is a really interesting one. Take a look at that. But jobs are a way for network automation solutions to take scripts that might exist in other realms of automation today and give them a home to live within Nautobot in an execution environment. And what that gives you as an organization is a way that you can put a nice interface, a nice web UI around these automation scripts that are running on the CLI today or so forth. And you can actually schedule those as well. You've got approval queues. So you can, you can actually say that a job needs to be approved by another engineer and so forth and that kind of thing. Well, jobs can provide, Nautobot apps can provide their own jobs and so forth. Git integrations as well. So there's a multitude of different avenues by which data can be stored within Git and actually imported into Nautobot via direct integrations. And so jobs can provide what are known as their own Git data sources for doing that. Our golden configuration plugin is an example of that, where it registers a provider for configuration backups that would be stored, by Rancid or Oxidize, that would pull the network configuration, store that in a Git repository, and then that would be consumed within Nautobot for purposes of golden configuration validation. Custom data validators is a cool one. I've got another slide on that. But ultimately, there's a great deal of flexibility that comes from the Nautobot app framework. So if you can dream it, you can build it on top of the app platform. And from an institutional organizational standpoint, what Nautobot provides is the execution environment. You're building on top of a platform. So you as an application developer don't have to worry about non-functional requirements like logging and access control and things like that, because you're building on top of a platform that already provides that. So you focus on your business logic that is specific to network automation use cases, and you get all of that for free because you're riding on top of the platform. So take a look at, just call out some of the key features that applications can provide. So we mentioned building their own data model. So on the left-hand side, you've got the Django code that's actually used for defining the circuit maintenance model here. And then on the right, just because you wrote that code and a little bit of extra boilerplate that goes along with this for rendering these views, you get that new data model interaction within the application itself. So again, the circuit maintenance, we'll talk about that later today. But this is around tracking, parsing vendor notifications for circuit maintenances and so forth. Just like data models can interact with other data models within the application, it makes sense that we have data that may exist in an Nautobot app that needs to interact with devices that exist within Nautobot or any other data models. So you can inject from an app UI content against any of the other models. So on the left-hand side here, when you install Nautobot stock, this is what the device page may look like. And on the right, you've got actually two different plugins that are providing content on this page. You've got the device onboarding plugin, which is how we can actually scan the network and import devices automatically into Nautobot. And then you've got the golden config plugin that's providing two different little widgets here for different content related to the configuration of the device. And the point is that this is a core page that comes from Nautobot itself, but an application developer can hook into that to provide additional content. But you as the user, the network engineer that's trying to use the automation platform here, don't have to concern yourself with that detail. You don't have to switch context in the application. The developers can provide a nice user experience for these flows. Navigational menu items, so you can inject things in here so an organization can create the platform that is specific to their needs and not have to worry about that because I'm installing a plugin, all of my plugin links and so forth are confined to this one little area, right? I can spread that out and actually create something that's intuitive for my users and so forth. You can also create homepage widgets. We've seen a great deal of excitement around this from higher ups, higher management. You want to be able to log into the platform and see some high-level detail, things like that. What's the percentage of my devices that are actually validated against the golden configuration? Well, they don't have to click through and go different things. We can create a widget for them right on the homepage, get that detail. They're happy. Takes a few minutes, and everyone wins. Custom validator. So again, this is a hook in the data model. So a good example of this is everyone has naming standards for devices, right? And everyone has one, right? So I can have an app that can actually define what my naming standard or set of naming standards are, and that can be validated in a multitude of different ways here. So I can prevent users from creating devices that don't conform to that naming standard and so forth. And of course, the fact that this is a part of the application framework means it extends beyond just this one use case. There's a multitude of different things. Like I can prevent users from connecting to interfaces if, say, the remote end doesn't already have a prefix assigned to it for that address, to make sure that I've got valid data all throughout the execution of modeling the network.
A quick question about that. Yep. Do certain devices have different naming schemas? Can you actually have host name schemas that are associated with the device types based off of what they could be named versus a standard universal one that like what you have here?
Yes. So this is actually an example of one that comes from an app itself called the data validation plugin, which allows you as an organization to install that app, and your users can define just regular expressions. But the point is no code is needed for them to do that. They have a nice interface where they can go and define those. What you're describing obviously is more intensive than that. And that is what the validation hook into the app framework allows you to do, is you actually write a little bit of Python code and you have access to all of to that entire device object. So you can say, okay, what's the device type? What's the vendor of that? And say, okay, maybe like the vendor name is associated some way in my naming standard. Well, you'd have access to that within that code that you'd be able to write that. Okay. And that's just a few of the fun ones that I like to call out. There's many, many more. Of course, these are all documented within the developer documentation for Nautobot Apps. but there's a few more that are called out here. And again, the extensibility features, I think, are really what enable us to build the most flexible automation solution that we have from a data modeling standpoint. Again, that's around custom fields and relationships and so forth. And you have access to all of that within the app platform.